Good morning, afternoon or evening wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. Now recently I've been doing my tutorials every 2 weeks, but this week I've managed to squeeze this one in because it's relatively short and it's something that I've been wanting to do for a long time now, and that's a watercolour pour, not to be confused with a pour watercolour, which is something that we all do from time to time. So it's a good opportunity to have a real experiment with the paint, pour in those initial washes. So we're going to be having a go at this spontaneous little landscape. So put your apron on, come and join me, and we'll paint this step by step together. So I tried a few experiments first without any real plan. And with this one, a sort of tree shape formed, so added in a few details just to give it a little bit of understanding. And with this one, again, I started pouring and the hillside sort of took shape, so I added in the houses and the steps. And I think this is going to be the scene I'm going to base the following tutorial on. Materials, I'm using some Winsor & Newton Professional 100% cotton rough texture, and it's on a block, which I would recommend today, or at least tape your paper down to a board, as there's going to be a lot of picking up and moving around. And today's brushes is a 2-inch flat, and from my range, my normal 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round, and of course my trusty number 3 rigger. Okay, so no drawing template today, as it's nice and simple. And the main colours I'm using for pouring are going to be Prussian blue, Payne's grey, some Schminker tundra blue, yellow ochre, cadmium orange, and any other colours I use I'll list below. I'm also going to be using some burnt umber Liquitex acrylic ink, and some Winsor & Newton granulating medium. Now sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't, so don't worry if you don't have any. And I'm using one of these plastic pipettes. Off we go! Now using my big number 2 brush, really soaking the sky area, but leaving that bottom triangle dry. Then in we go with the yellow ochre, and this is a real milky consistency of about 50% paint, 50% water ratio. Then in with the orange, Prussian blue, and some tundra blue, Payne's grey, and I'm tilting my paper diagonally and letting them all run and merge together. And these little pots I'm using, they were just cheap and cheerful from Amazon. I think I got them for about £5. And I'm using a plastic pipette here just to get a lot of wet paint directly onto the paper. Lots of moving around of the paper, and you can angle it to get the paint to flow in any direction you want. Now a good tip if you don't have a wipeable surface is a plastic tray should do the job, and ideally you don't want to do this on top of a Louis XV mahogany table. Here just taking any excess from the edges, and here a little spray just to keep things moving. And you can see here that I'm trying to keep a sense of light just above the cottages. Ooh, I love that purple. Now you can see how much lighter it dries, so try and compensate for that in your mixes. Now I've got a bit of a ugly stain here, but we'll fix that later. But I'm just loving this little cloudy effect here. Now for the bottom section, I'm doing exactly the same thing, but letting the paint run diagonally from the opposite direction, using all the same colours of course. And I'm intentionally leaving that bottom corner unpainted just for a bit of visual effect. Flat brush here, all very loose and still wet in wet, not really defining anything in particular. Clean water here. Now for some of this acrylic ink, and this can really give some wonderful spidery effects. And I'm also dropping colour in here with my brush. Okay, let's see what happens with this granulating medium. Now it works better with some colours and usually really well with acrylic ink, but let's just experiment and chuck some in. And a little table salt just in the corner here. Splatting here into the wet with some Payne's grey and tilt again to get some form of movement. And here some directional brush splats. Let this dry, and then I'm quite crudely ripping some masking tape to create a mask along these edges where the sky meets the hill. Then wetting around the cottages with my brush and just a little touch of water spray. Next, I'm using some very dark values to create a high contrast around the cottages and the hillside. And splatter in some colour to get that random texture without disturbing the wash below. And for these roofs, you can use any colours you like. So now we need to let this totally dry. So it's a perfect time for a short break. No time for a break. Drink and paint at the same time. It can be done. Right, next off with the tape. So here you can see quite a hard, unnatural edge, but we can sort that out later. Next, dry brush technique with my brush flat to the paper for some lovely tree and bush shapes. Next for some details, and again you can really use any colour you like for these, but I'm going to be using some burnt umber and burnt sienna. So for this little wall I'm using some burnt umber, but then softening with clean water so it blends into the bank. And here above to create a little contrast. Next, a light spray, and this is so these final details don't have a hard edge, but subtly blend into the background in a few places. And I'm just using some Payne's Grey with my number 6 brush. A few more dry brush textures here with some burnt umber. Trusty rigger time for these branch details. I just love this brush as it just seems to go where it wants and gives a lovely natural feel to my brush strokes. So as I said earlier, a few unnatural looking sharp edges. So make sure your washes are dry, then soften and blend with a damp tissue. Right, let's put a few birds in the sky. Now remember, try and get lots of different wing shapes. Now I've done a video on adding birds into your landscapes, link above if you're interested. Okay, now with a white pastel pencil for these lovely highlights and sparkles. And what's nice about using a pastel, you can soften and blend with your finger. Of course, a couple of white birds being hit by the light. And there we go, all done. And I think it's got a nice lot of atmosphere. And I particularly like some of the texture that you can see here from the granulating fluid and where the salt has done his thing. And that lovely textured edge created by the acrylic ink. Now I know it's quite different to the one I was basing it on, but that's the beauty of watercolour. You never really know what you're going to get, and that's why I love it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. Just really have an experiment with the paint and just see where it takes you. What's the worst that can happen? So, as always, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already, and oh yes, I mustn't forget, Doors keeps reminding me, thank all of those who've put a tip in the tip jar. Really do appreciate it, very generous of you, and everyone who supports this channel each week. It really is appreciated. As ever, I look forward to seeing you all again next week. So take care now, everyone. Cheers.